Sure. It was mostly intended just to call out for folks who aren't following that repo super closely. But essentially, in talking with some people who are interested in using Ambient, there was a little bit of confusion about ztunnel because it is both like a core component and also like a specific implementation of that component. And so I wanted to look into if we can come up with a different word for ztunnel when it is not our specific implementation, but rather just like the component itself. It could be handy if we ever get to a state where someone else has implemented that component in a different way, and there is a version of I don't know the word, a version of ztunnel that's not a ztunnel.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that makes sense. I don't have a great suggestion, but that sounds good.
Yeah, I also don't have like a ton of great suggestions. Also, I don't know if we want to put it here or if folks want to just comment on the issues so we have a running log of the ideas. And it looks like Mitch did join, so if he wants to have a discussion about his, we don't necessarily need to just sit here and bike shed, unless that's what folks are interested in.
Feel free to keep going, Ian. That's not a problem. I'm not in a rush.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could, as Ben mentioned with the node proxy, it could be specific with sidecar proxy, node proxy, and waypoint proxy.
Yeah, that was sort of where my head had gone as well. Maybe that's just like a simple thing, and we don't overthink it.
As long as we don't take on words that is broadly used for other things like proxy and try to to capture it, it's better.
Sorry, what was the suggestion, Costin?
To not use the word proxy. I mean,
okay.
Not proxy. I mean, Istio proxy, ambient proxy, anything qualified is good, but proxy is such a generic term that everyone will be confused, including ourselves.
Go back to PEP.
PEP is, well,
maybe. I don't mind PEP. Everyone else was hated it when I was suggesting it.
But this is not proxy.
Right. Yeah. So maybe then specifying the location, because we specify the location, it's sort of is also specifying the purpose. We'll have to have very clear docs, and then we can bike shed on what to call it if we don't call it a proxy, PEP, or something else.
Does the location matter? I mean, ztunnel can be used as a sidecar, can be used as per node, can be used as a VM as a process.
Well, so that's the key thing, though. Well, sorry, go ahead, Ian. You were going to say the same thing.
I think you were saying it. You can go, John.
So is Envoy, right? We call it the sidecar proxy when it's a sidecar. We call it gateway when it's a gateway. Like with ztunnel, it's a node proxy when it's a node proxy, and if you want to run it somewhere else, then it's the other thing when you run it in the other thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not that ztunnel is now the node proxy. There is a thing called a node proxy, and ztunnel is an implementation of it when it's running in that form. So if it was, I don't know. You'd have to call it like if we've had both running as sidecars, we'd probably have to say Envoy has a sidecar proxy, ztunnel has a sidecar proxy, or something like that. If you care to specify.
Yeah, the best thing about node proxy is everybody understand what it is. So it's not like a ztunnel, what exactly is ztunnel? Zero trust tunnel, what exactly is zero trust tunnel? So you have to explain like in different ways to make people understand. With node proxy, it's like, okay, Q proxy is a node proxy. What else I know is a node proxy. People just get it.
Yeah, and that would be like, in my opinion, a goal is that the name that we use in the docs is intuitive to what it's doing, whereas ztunnel is something we just totally made up out of the blue. So.
Yeah, I mean,
dedicated proxy versus shared proxy or node proxy. Does it? Can we avoid the word sidecar as well? That's what I'm trying to get at.
but that's usually what we call that deployment, right? I think that'd be part of the issue. Like all the docs say sidecar, like, and actually the new ones have the left panel. It's ambient and sidecar. So we would have to.
No, but it's still ambient. I mean, it's not being. I mean, the sidecar is sidecar with envoys. That's the word we use for envoy. Let's not multiplex it. We have Z-tunnel can be run as a dedicated mode where there is one Z-tunnel running as a process on a VM, for example, where you don't have a node, or on a pod as a process, container, or whatever. And there is a sidecar is, let's keep the word sidecar for envoy, whatever it's doing, so we don't confuse people with sidecars in different ways.
Yeah, I see your point. I think once we have like a valid use case for actually deploying Z-tunnel as a sidecar, maybe it becomes more concrete to bike shed that. Like,
I can give you an example use case. So a dedicated, let's say as dedicated. There are vendors like Google, for example, others as well, that do not allow users to mess with the node, don't allow users to install CNIs, don't allow users to run with host permissions. In those cases, if you want to use Ambient, and Ambient sounds like a good thing to use, you need to use a dedicated Z-tunnel and use IP tables. That's Autopilot, for example, is currently the only way to run it on Autopilot is in dedicated mode. So it's not specific to Autopilot. I mean, every vendor that focuses on security will have similar restrictions on ability to install arbitrary CNIs. Does it make sense? I mean, it's a use case.
no, I mean, I think the use case makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. Your dedicated proxy running as a sidecar TM.
No, don't use the word sidecar. It's a dedicated container. I mean, it's an inside, I don't know. It's a dedicated container providing L4 ambient. And migration is another very good use case where you don't want to, suddenly enable, change your CNI to try things out. You want to, I don't know. I know John is concerned about dedicated for other reasons, but in terms of usability and use cases, are plenty.
So, Costin, are you suggesting that we still refer to sidecar for the traditional sidecar, but then just for ambient, we don't call it a node proxy. We would call it right.
No,
yeah, we call it node proxy, or we call it dedicated proxy.
We call it node proxy, whatever you want to call it, but we have some term to define the use case of Z-tunnel as a dedicated proxy, which we use on VMs and on containers that on pods that do not have a CNI capable of node proxy. I mean, I don't have a problem with node ambient proxy or what we call it for node. I just want to not call sidecars a thing that runs as an L4 proxy for as a container.
Does it? But I think a lot. Well, okay.
Because sidecar is already
dedicated and node. Like that seems like a lot of for the same code or the same binary. It's just going to be called something different depending on how it's deployed.
We don't have to call it the same. We can change the name and can have a Z-tunnel dedicated binaries that or image that users will not confuse with the per node. So it's even more clear.
I think it's helpful to think about this as the difference between the name of a container image, a container image, and the name of the daemon set that runs it.
Yeah.
When we run the Istio gateway daemon or deployment, it's called a gateway deployment, and yet the image is, I think the container name is Istio proxy. The Istio proxy is the binary. The gateway is the deployment. That's how we're using the binary. So if we name the daemon set something like the Istio L4 node proxy and keep the container name Z-tunnel, I think that clears things up, and you can use that Z-tunnel container image for other purposes. I don't think Istio does at the moment, but there's nothing stopping you.
That's a very good idea. Because then you can change the implementation. You can, just like we have Istio proxy, and it can be used. You can put something else in Istio proxy. It doesn't have to be Envoy. For example, it will be zTunnel. Yeah, I think I like this.
Sorry, Mitch, could you write down your proposal? I was
If I
reading.
have to write stuff down, then it's not worth it. I rescind.
Right. But do we, I guess with the docs, do we want to refer to it specifically as zTunnel? Because we could be looking at non-zTunnel implementations. I mean, for the...
So to my mind, there is like some term that you use to describe the general thing. And if someone subs in another implementation that works the same way, that's interchangeable. When we talk about something that zTunnel specifically does, then we should probably refer to our implementation by name or something like that. I don't have a concrete use case of something that zTunnel only will probably ever do, but that would be where I draw the line, yeah, I think.
I think there are already implementation of zTunnel. I saw a demo. It's running in kernel or some card or whatever. I mean, it's not that different implementation already. It's not even if they use the same code, they use it in different ways. And I agree with Mitch that it should be in the image names that defines what implementation is, not that you see everywhere else.
So, and then how would we refer to it in the docs?
You don't. Your users don't care. They install a Helm chart that contains whatever we choose for debugging.
Well, no, I mean, but we have like architecture drawings and stuff. We need to call it something, right?
No, not ambient proxy, whatever you use. That's a name that was discussed previously. I mean, I think the main point is to not call it zTunnel. I mean, anything else is fine.
Right. I'm just saying, what do we want? I thought the point was, what do we call it in docs? And this seems to be the. I'm just saying, do we call it the daemon set name, or do we call it something else?
I'm happy either way.
The downside to calling it the Istio L4 node proxy everywhere in the docs is that that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you could drop the Istio part in the docs.
Drop the Istio part.
Just call it the node proxy, maybe.
Yeah. Node
Ambient.
proxy, maybe ambient proxy.
Ambient proxy is good because that's ambient is a clear term. Everyone understands ambient.
I'm less sure that everyone understands ambient, but I could see it working out, or at least it gives us the opportunity to explain to them ambient when they ask.
Yeah,
Yeah, but is
but they
waypoint
see-
not ambient? So wouldn't that technically encompass the waypoint proxy?
yeah, that's the other concern I have too. What about waypoint? Yeah,
I think
No,
ambient proxy is too generic.
I
Ambient
agree.
L4 proxy. Ambient L4 node proxy versus ambient L7 node proxy.
I don't think Ambient is that strong a name outside of Istio. That's the other thing to be thinking about too. Like no proxy, people know what it is. Ambient proxy, what exactly is ambient? Okay, I have to learn what ambient is before I can understand this.
But if you put Istio, people will assume it's a voice. I mean, Istio, it's also kind of an organization, not a.
I mean, people know Istio. People know no proxy. I don't think people know Ambient yet. I mean, if you think about it, our Ambient channel has 600 users, but Istio has like 10K plus.
But I guess, Lynn, I was thinking that since this would be in the Istio documentation, that it would be kind of clear that it was the Istio part. The Istio part, I guess, I was assuming would be implied.
Yeah, I
Right,
agree that we don't have
exactly.
to call it an Istio node proxy necessarily. That does seem.
Yeah.
At least not in docs. Maybe putting Istio in the deployment name could be helpful if it's
Yeah,
outside the Istio system namespace, etc. But
Yeah. No, I think like that makes sense in the namespaces and stuff. Yeah, I agree.
Well, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves on renaming the daemon set. There's a reason why we have 10 different names for everything. It's because it's a pain in the ass to change the actual code names. That's one thing to change the docs. So if we want to do that, maybe it ties into Mitch's next point on upgrades. Like, let's make sure it's, I mean, if we can do it, sure, but
Yeah, it's a big discussion, and we need Craig to buy in because he's doing most of the work on this too.
no,
So.
Craig's doing the docs. Like, I have no issue. We can change the docs names every day if we want.
Oh, no, but he has to be on
text-
board before
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
willing to do any
Sure,
work.
but yeah, I'm saying Craig needs to be on board with that, but we need a credible plan to actually change the daemon set because that actually is real technical issues. It's not just naming, bike shedding, and marketing, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have to necessarily do them both to do the marketing.
How about for new stuff like the dedicated thing? Can we pick a name for the dedicated? So including a container name that I can put in the documentation of how to use Ambient as a dedicated mode.
You might hate this, but so far we've been actually using Istio proxy as the container name for everything with ztunnel because there's a lot of tooling that expects anything Istio related to be Istio proxy container name.
Yeah, I'm aware of this. It will be the container will be Istio proxy, but yeah.
Also, keep in mind, I don't think people are going to be looking at the image name much. They're going to be looking at the chart name. So that's probably the granularity at which, if you want a distinguishing name, you put it.
To be clear, John, on the Istio proxy name, yes, there is a lot of tools that assume that there is an envoy running in Istio proxy and it helps with injection and other stuff, but it would not necessarily be that bad if we use a different name for the container to not confuse people. So basically Istio container, especially if we put it as a native sidecar container in Kubernetes and we change a bit the semantics. I don't know what you think about it, but it's convenient to use Istio proxy for sure, but it may be better to
Yeah, I'm less I'm not super sold on whether we should or shouldn't have done that or continue to do it in the future. So,
but are people okay with the idea of having some documentation, some blog post or something that, hey, you can also use Ambient in dedicated mode on VMs or on clusters that don't have ability to modify the node?
I don't think on Istio official docs or blogs we should have discussion. We need to do the technical work and make it a feature and test it and claim support and all that, and then market it. I mean, if and that's only Istio official. I don't mind if you or I or someone else goes and writes it or tweets it or blogs it or whatever. But it would be very confusing, I think, if we don't actually have that as a fully supported thing.
No. Let's start with some experiment, some so for people are aware that it's possible, and then if there is interest and if there are other, if we see usage, then we can add testing and progress from there. Just want to be sure we are aligned and we are not going to kill dedicated mode anytime soon in code, break it basically. And I can add some tests with you.
No, I don't think there's any desire to make it any worse, certainly.
Okay.
All right, should we move to upgrade?
sounds good to me. Let me go ahead and share what I've got here. So I've reworked the Istio Ambient upgrade doc. We covered a couple of weeks ago that the document focused on in-place upgrades and didn't take advantage of any revision structure, particularly for waypoints. So we wanted to rework that. As I've reworked this, I've tried to reduce the number of warnings on the doc. It was mostly warnings before. I think it's still got a little bit of work to do in terms of reducing the red print. But we do need some because there are some gotchas with ambient upgrades. If you're accustomed to upgrading Istio in place in sidecar mode where data planes do not automatically upgrade, you could come into a pretty rude surprise finding out that if an in-place upgrade of the ambient control plane will upgrade all the data planes, or at least all your waypoint data planes and gateways, etc. So we do want to make sure that people are aware of that. We also want to make sure that they're aware that there's currently no revision process for upgrading Z-Tunnel. I'm hoping that there will be a separate blog post about that in the coming weeks, but I've still got more research to do in terms of node relabeling and things like that. So that is not ready to go yet, and it's explicitly out of scope here. It's not the sort of thing I would recommend yet for users. So for the sake of this update, we're still doing an in-place upgrade of the Z-Tunnel. I've also noted that there's not a great place to understand how you ought to structure or lay out your mesh with regard to tags and revisions in the dock. I think I'd like to bite that off maybe for the next major release or minor release rather than patch. But that does mean that I've included this sort of upfront section that should give an introduction. Oh, and by the way, this link, if you want to explore it yourself, this link is in the notes. This upfront section sort of explains roughly what are the components you're going to be upgrading, which of these components can be done kind of on a canary basis, which ones cannot. And it also gives a pretty large wall of text in terms of how to structure your tags and revisions. I don't remember if that's this paragraph, or I think there might be another paragraph about it. Oh, here it is. Oh, and this needs to be separated out. So there's still some rough edges. As you can see, this is meant to be a title of this section, and then this is meant to start a paragraph below, so I'll need a line break there. At the high level, what I'm trying to do is not just tell users, hey, look, a tag does this and a revision does that, which is what most of our other documents have done, but rather, how do we think you ought to structure your Istio install? This document is fairly opinionated. It says you should not ever modify a revision. A revision should effectively be tied to an Istio version or an Istio installation. If you want to change something about that installation, you should use a new revision. And then secondarily, workloads, namespaces, gateways should not reference revisions directly, but should reference tags. That way, an entire cluster or an entire mesh can be upgraded without ever relabeling anything. All you have to do is install a new revision and edit some tags, and all of your layer 7 proxies will be upgraded. Reference. Ben says, I have some preference for not inheriting all of the sidecar revision semantics for tags versus revisions. Ben, do you want to elaborate on that? I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, so like, as you know, and like I think you pointed all this stuff out originally and brought it to my attention, a lot of this stuff is very non-standard and we don't have good APIs around it. It's all in a mutating webhook config, right? Like the behavior, the tags versus revisions. I think revisions make sense, but the whole like tags as an alias for revisions thing that we currently do in sidecars, I don't know if we necessarily need that bit, right? Like, I don't want to just say we have tags and revisions from sidecar, so we need that in ambient. Like, I think we need revisions. I think tags and like the whole like secondary layer of their aliases for revisions, and you can move like that. That adds a lot of complexity, and I don't know if we need that to start with. Or ever. Maybe we do. I don't know. But like, I'm more ambivalent on the concept of revision tags than revisions themselves, I guess, is the only thing I'm saying right now.
So to be clear, this document is not proposing any changes to how Ambient is implemented. Tags are already supported. They're also documented in our Argo CD reference architecture. That's how the Ambient proxies are upgraded. And the alternative to using tags would be that either you need to edit a revision in place, in which case all of the workloads tied to that revision immediately upgrade, or you need to relabel all of the workloads that used to point to an old revision to a new revision. For very large clusters, that's going to be a problematic workflow.
I mean, you're sort of going to have to do that either way, though, right? Like you have to move stuff. There's no way to not move stuff. Either we do it for you with the tag, or like you you upgrade in place, you're going to disrupt that revision. So if you don't want to disrupt that revision, you've got to move stuff off of it, right? Like that's kind of the invariant, if I understand correctly, I believe so.
Right, but with tags, you update that in one location, and you can structure. The idea is that users will structure their ideal upgrade into waves, right? So I'm going to upgrade this tag first, then this tag second, then this tag third. It gives them a way to sort of have their own blast radius controls and their own steps for an upgrade. If you don't do that, then the process is find everywhere that the revision label is used and change those labels one at a time, which could be potentially thousands of places across a cluster.
That sort of locks us into restarting workloads, though, right? Because you can't. The workload will never. If you have your own, like you can't. You'll never have a workload on the default revision. It'll always be on a named revision. So if you want to move stuff, you're going to have to move everything always, right? Just changing the tag doesn't move anything, and that's a little confusing for people, I think, semantically.
So changing the tag does move everything immediate.
But it's not going to move workloads, right? They're already managed by whatever revision. Well, okay, yeah, I guess that's yeah. If we ever revision ztunnel though, then that gets to be a little trickier. Is the problem, right? Like of what ztunnel manages what workloads and what istod manages what workloads. As long as we only have one ztunnel, it's fine. But if we ever do anything right there, it kind of locks us out of doing anything useful.
So as far as I know, if we were to come up with a way to run multiple revisions of the ztunnel concurrently, we could have the ztunnel respect tags as well as revisions without too much difficulty.
Well, if we have an API, which we don't have, right? It's all. I don't really want to have a situation where Ambient has to parse the webhook config to figure out what to do. Basically, like that. That is something I would like to avoid.
I would be like Ben. I would be so in favor of an API. I brought a proposal for that a year ago.
Yeah, I know.
It was shot down. If there's interest in reviving that proposal, I would be very interested. Maybe there was something incidental that was wrong about it, or it was just the wrong timing. But that was a lot of effort that didn't result in a lot of action, and so I've not chosen to revive that today. Costin, I think I've been ignoring your hand. Sorry, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, so I also don't believe that tags and revisions should be used with Ambient, with ztunnel. It's absolutely not necessary, and there are other ways to do it. I don't think we have to have an API beyond what we have today. So again, the problem is you can have multiple istod revisions. That's perfectly fine. And istod, each of them have a different URL. What we need is ztunnel when it is upgraded to point to a specific istod, and that can be done during the configuration of ztunnel and perfectly fine with the helm chart that we have. We don't need, we have an API to the helm chart. There is a way that actually gives you both an API and full flexibility, which is to run a waypoint or gateway in Istio system that would forward request, do traffic splitting, do whatever you want between different istod revisions. If we are okay for people running waypoints in their namespaces, I don't think it's a huge burden for users who want this kind of flexibility to put another waypoint in Istio system and use that waypoint to perhaps have a single TLS certificate, perhaps do some extra traffic splitting, to do all kind of other policies that a normal gateway or waypoint can do. And then ztunnel points to Istio system. The waypoint is doing whatever routing it wants. Everyone is happy. Clear and simple.
I see where you're going with that. I'll say this for this proposal, we're not changing anything about the way that the waypoint upgrades. All I'm doing is documenting how the waypoint upgrades today. And that does not use revisions except to specify what control plane or which control plane it ought to be connecting to.
No, Mitch, I meant to use a waypoint to implement the splitting and routing of to different versions of istod. So dedicated waypoint for Istio system, not how to upgrade waypoints particularly.
That's interesting, and I'd be interested in exploring that with a design doc and the like, but it's very much out of scope for what we're talking about here. John, did you have something to add?
Not yet. I have a clarification question, then maybe something to add. When you do the ztunnel install and you set the revision tag, it wasn't clear to me if I have a tag, do I pass the tag name or do I pass the concrete revision?
This is on the ztunnel step?
Yeah.
You do need to pass the revision name to the Z-tunnel upgrade.
Okay.
Actually, anytime you're setting the revision value in Helm, it should be set to a revision name.
Okay.
The time
Then
you explicitly use tags is when labeling gateways.
yeah. Then I guess I'm confused about the concerns about tags, because there's not any use of tags for Z-tunnel, or is it only about waypoints
right.
that people are complaining about? Not complaining. Sorry, that seems dismissive. But are all the concerns around waypoints, not Z-tunnels?
In terms of the concerns that I'm trying to resolve with this,
I meant like from Ben and Costin and
Yeah. Like, as long as we're only looking at revisions, I'm happy. I'm just sort of like being cautious about introducing the concept so that we don't leak tags into ambient code.
Yeah.
Right. As long as it's completely separate, I'm fine. Like, that's okay.
I believe it is. Yeah. Like that's what I was trying to weed out. Like, I think the concern that Costin and Ben had, and I would have if Mitch said something else, is that Z-tunnel can't really do tags, or it shouldn't, and it doesn't. And this doc also isn't making it do tags.
Yeah,
and like Costin said, yeah, it's like the revision literally is just the address of each DOD to reach.
Yeah, I apologize for diverting. Then I was just you know, I hear the word tag and revision and it makes my skin crawl, so I have to say something. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, so the tags and revisions control gateways and waypoints, or tags in particular. The only reason revision was added to this command is so that it knows which control plane to be connecting to, since you're running multiple control planes concurrently. There's nothing else that is revisioned about this Z-tunnel. And of course, here we've got the handy warning that we recommend blue-green pools or something, which we haven't documented yet. The CNI upgrade step is pretty much kept as it was in the other document. No big changes there, but the big changes come with the waypoints. Obviously, we're trying to use as little istio-cuddle as possible for this document because it is the Helm-based upgrade. The pre-check command you really can't get around having istio-cuddle for. So whereas we would normally say use istio-cuddle tag list for this particular, or revision list for this particular thing, trying to help them to do that without istio-cuddle as much as possible. So this just lists all your mutating webhook configurations that have the tag label, and it shows the tag and the revision that it belongs to in the output. Pretty simple there. And then for each tag, one at a time, probably with some sort of order to it, that's going to be up to the user to bring the order. They're going to update these tags to point to the new revision. Soon as they do that, any waypoints, any gateway API ingress or egress gateways will update. So it's recommended that you closely monitor the health for a time and then proceed with the next tag. We've documented the rollback command for a tag here, so that you can take an entire wave back if you see problems. And then once all of those are upgraded, you do still need to upgrade your Istio gateways. Those are not automatically upgraded. I don't know that we're recommending users mix those into the ambient model. We could remove this section if those are just explicitly unsupported. Little bit of, I'm not even sure that the verifying the workload status, I thought about getting rid of this section. I'd be interested in some input here. It's listing like your Istio system workloads, which doesn't seem terribly informative after a gateway upgrade. But then we uninstall our previous control plane once we're sure it's no longer being used. I would love to have a command here that shows how to be sure your control plane is no longer in use. I'm not sure if we have a command like that. And then upgrade the CRDs is, of course, the last step because it's difficult to reverse. So I've got the PR linked. It's not all of the tests are passing, so I'm still iterating on it, but there's not really major changes being made. If you wanted to have a look at the code and start reviewing, giving feedback, I would like to try to get this published in time for our upcoming patch release, which actually, now that I say that out loud, has that already shipped?
Yeah, we just shipped 121.
Okay.
There were some people that reported upgrading Ambient in production as well. One of them did have a small outage, but I think that was a bug in the CNI. So it's mean
Okay.
it wasn't actually the upgrade process. So, well, I mean, it wasn't something that could be fixed by the stock. I think it's a
Okay.
potentially.
So with a patch out, I would like to get this out relatively quickly, so that all of our users are not doing in-place upgrades of all of their gateways. But this is overall what we've got. Moving forward, I would like to probably create a section in our documentation about like an opinionated way to structure tags and revisions. That's really not tied to Ambient specifically or to Sidecar specifically. It's generic, so I'm not sure where to put that document. But rather than just giving users the tools and saying good luck, I think maybe it's time to start saying, here's what appears to have emerged as a best practice for how to upgrade a large production mesh. Lynn?
Yeah, hey, quick question. When you label your namespace for Istio IO data plane ambient, as part of the process when you add a new revision for Istio D, do you have to change the namespace label to do istio.io/rep?
No. If there's no revision label on that namespace or any workloads in it, then it will pick up the default revision.
And the default revision was decided because the sidecar has default revision, which from the mutable webhook config.
Yeah, default revision is effectively we call it the default revision. It's effectively a tag, and it is stored as a mutating webhook config, just like all other revisions and tags. What I didn't do is I didn't include the upgrade instructions for the default revision. And now that I think about it, I probably ought to make sure that that's included. That might be a little bit more complicated than a normal tag upgrade. So I'll take an action item to add that to this section.
Okay, thank you. So basically, after I test the revision, I can change the revision to be back to be the default, so that I don't need to worry about changing the istio.io.
For most users, default revision would be the last thing that they move to point, or default tag would be the last thing they move over to the new revision before shutting the old revision down.
So, Mitch, I mean, I understand this is based on the existing status and what injection did, but in a world without injection and ambient, and gateways do not use injection, I mean, they should not use injection, and ambient should not use injection, I don't think anyone wants to label anything anymore. I mean, it's yes, we have the namespace the ambient enabled per namespace, because we are not yet ready to have it on by default. But we should stop this whole labeling nightmare, because it's good for all Istio, but it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we can provide the same functionality by creating a service in Istio system, by the gateways that I previously mentioned. There are many other ways to do it where the user do not have to keep labeling stuff. So especially in gateways and waypoints where we have a clear mechanism with gateway classes where you can specify, gateway class is Canary or whatever, we can put configurations specific to the gateway class. The only reason we have labels is injection, and injection is out. So I would like to see good reasons to keep using labels.
So I'm not aware of any way that you could create a Kubernetes gateway object and indicate when creating that object which revision of Istio it's meant to use, other than a label. Are you suggesting annotations or something else?
No, we can create a Istio class called Istio-foo, and when Istio-canary is installed, it can create a gateway class Istio-canary, and it's perfectly fine. I mean, and that's the whole point of a gateway class, to specify a class of gateways that have a particular version, particular implementation, particular whatever.
Yeah, okay, I remember that proposal, Costin. Ben, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I had it. This is more of a general question. This may have come up before. You might know, Mitch. Do we have any insight onto, again, tags? Do people only use that basically to solve the what is the default revision problem, or do they use tags and revisions for many other purposes, or do they basically only use tags to solve what the default revision should be problem, which is like kind of how we document is like the primary use of the tag in relation to revisions. Like, is just to solve like what is the default revision that you use, right? Is that the only use case for tags, really, or do we have a lot of people using it for other things? Do we know? I don't know.
So I'm familiar with a number of users who have made use of tags for structuring their upgrade into waves. They would basically say, here is a set of workloads that I want to upgrade first. They're perhaps the low risk workloads that I don't really mind having moved over to a new thing, versus the high risk workloads being in a much later wave, and then having time between those waves. That was my experience, although that experience is somewhat outdated at this point. Not having worked at a company that sold Istio for, obviously for the last month, but other than that, not for the last 2 years.
Right, and again, like I guess the only thing you would actually you could still express that with just revisions. You would just have to use the same revision names for your waves as you did last time, or retag things, right?
No, you would need to run multiple control planes of the same version then. Like you'd need to run one control plane per revision. So if you have 6 waves, you've always got 6 control planes running in the cluster.
Wouldn't you have that anyway? Like, doesn't revision imply control plane?
Revision does, but tag does not. Tag
does not,
implies revision. So you might have 6 tags pointing at one revision.
Yeah, that gets wild though. All right, yeah, sorry, Carrie.
That was all I had. So if there's, I'm open to any more discussion, comments, etc. Exactly, Costin, you're right. Prod and Canary are generally the same control plane if you're in a stable state that has completed an upgrade and waiting for the next one. We do support running this indefinitely with multiple control planes concurrently, both in sidecar mode and in ambient mode. And I know that Google had some experience doing that for their users that worked to some degree. Keith?
Yeah, I think I want to key on something you said earlier, Mitch. Excuse me. And I think we need to be a lot more specific with how we spec out tags to users. A lot of the discussion that we've had here in the chat, as well as some synchronously, suggests to me that the tag feature of Istio is underspecified, and underspecified features tend to lead to mismatched user expectation. And mismatched user expectation tends to mean that there are use cases that we end up having to support forever because people are using it in ways that we did not expect. We are probably already in that boat, unfortunately. But I think the sooner we can get some level of guidance out there for how these things should be used, we at least will be able to find out if we have hope of rectifying that. Again, like I put in the chat, most of my concern with the tags feature is that it's today, implementation-wise, it's just an alias for a mutating webhook. And that really couples it to the injection implementation detail, which is not fantastic. We kind of just bubbled, that implementation detail up to the user as an API. Not really as an API. It's a command line API, not a full API. So from a community maintainer perspective, I would like to be able to have a decision on what tags are going to be. Are they going to be a full API, or do we not need it? Again, I think we're probably way past the point of not needing it anymore. So I'm all for reviving discussion around what it looks like to make it a formal API. But I suspect to do that, we'll need to tighten the bounds on what it can be, because as we've been discussing, it can, as it stands today, tags can be used for a lot of different things because it's underspecified. Yeah,
I totally agree. I'd like to get more specific on that. I'm not sure I'm happy to take the action item of writing that doc. I've done a lot of the development and so far, talking about tags and revisions. But what I'm a little bit less clear on is where this belongs. It's not really an ambient or sidecar concept. It belongs pretty equally to both at this point. I don't know if it goes in concepts. It's not a task. Maybe it's operations.
Well, you've got a section on waypoints in here, right? Which would be, Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be against duplicating it in both and like targeting it for sidecar versus ambient, like maybe talking more about waypoints in the ambient copy or something. But yeah, it's open to debate.
Okay, sort of having a link to structuring your mesh in both places, that could work.
Yeah, I have to comment on the PR. It seemed like I really like this. It's really good. A lot of it is overlapping, but also not the same as the normal Helm doc. So like in some way, regardless of how we organize it, like having the same information so that we get the best of both is probably handy. But I will leave that at the end of my doc suggestions because I'm not a docs guy.
So
but like one specific thing, like the upgrades, you did them last. This doc does them first. I don't know which one's better, but they should probably be the same. Yep.
Oh, the CRDs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you gave a compelling reason to do it last, so like maybe you're totally right, but it doesn't seem like we should recommend two different things. Because
that information was pretty out of date. I just remember at Google we found that CRDs were very, very difficult to downgrade. I don't know if that's still the case. Obviously, I haven't worked there in about 2 years. And so for like the Google documentation on ASM, we had CRDs upgraded last.
They're hard to downgrade, but I think the rationale between upgrading CRDs versus that the new revision of Istio did not require a new CRD that doesn't exist. It's graceful, but you're not going to be able to utilize the full impact of like the full functionality of the new revision unless you've got the most up-to-date CRDs.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like Helm by default shows in-place upgrades and then has a separate section on how to use revisions and tags. I'll dig into that a little bit and try to rationalize these two so that they are consistent. Other thoughts, comments? All right, well, if you have anything moving forward, feel free to leave it in the PR. Like I said, it's still a work in progress, but I'm hoping to get it to land inside of the next week. Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Mitch.
Looks like I was the last thing on the agenda too. Is there anything else we need to talk about this week?
No, I don't think so. Thanks.
Sounds good. I'll see
Thanks.
everybody Monday.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.